So let's talk about tuples, which has got to be the weirdest sounding name on the planet. But it's a thing, and it's a Java thing or Python thing. It's actually the only place I've ever seen it is Python. All right, so let's look at tuples. And so we saw how to represent images as pixels in a two-dimensional grid, right? We saw that we could put the numbers in there. And each pixel is a combination of red, green, and blue values. And that just represents the intensity of each of the colors. And so we want a way of representing this image in Python, right? We have to represent these three values for a single pixel somehow. So let's look at a very, very, very small image. And we're just going to have 4 pixels. And this is going to be 0, 1, and this is going to be 0, 1. And the height is equal to 2, and the width is equal to 2, giving us 4 pixels. And I want to be able to put in red, green, blue, and white. Right, so how do we represent this image in Python? So we know each pixel has 3 values to it. And if we look at a single pixel, we look at that red value in the upper left corner. We're going to see it has those 3 values, 255, 0, 0. That's how we represent red as a picture. And to store this in a tuple, this is called a tuple. And it has a parentheses around the values. It's very similar to a list. Stores a sequence of values. And we're going to talk a little bit more about tuples in a minute. So we have that tuple. The green tuple would be 0, 255, 0, 0. Whoops. Just 0. And then the blue tuple in the bottom left would be 0, 0, 255. And then the white tuple would be 255, 255, 255. Now, our tuples here have 3 values, but in general, a tuple can have any number of values, 10 things, 100 things. It's very similar to a list. It just has a few different rules, which we'll cover soon. Here, though, we're only storing these 3 things. And now we have 4 tuples that represent the image. And we can think about that as the worst drawn image on the planet. And if we think about those 4 values as being inside of a two-dimensional grid, it's like a 2D table, right? It's a 2x2 grid. And we could actually write that value in Python. We know how to do nesteds. We now know how to make a tuple. So we can do the outer, remember this is going to be nested. There's 2 rows, so in a list of lists. The first list has the tuple for 255, 255, 0, 0. That's red. And then there's another tuple in the first list for green. That's the first list, right? That's red. That's green. And then there's a second list. And that has the tuple 0, 0, 255 for blue. And then 255, 255, 255 for white. That's the second list. And then we have to close the two-dimensional list. So that's white and that's the blue. That's what that's going to look like in Python to represent this 2x2 image that we kind of set up here, red, green, blue, white. Essentially, it's just going to be 4 tuples. If we look at this in Python, as soon as I load idle, if we define the red color as a tuple, then the green value as a tuple, blue as a tuple, and then white as a tuple. And now we can print out red, green, blue, white, and we can print out their values as a tuple. And now we can make our image as a list of red and green, comma, blue and white. Right. So we have this list here that has, in fact, let's print that out, which means typing it correctly. So you can see it printed out. There's a list right here of 2 elements, and it has a tuple. 25500 is the red, 0250 is the green. Then we have a second list over here with 2 tuples, 00255, which is blue, and then 255, 255, 255, which is white. And so we have these 2 1D lists inside of this 2-dimensional list to store basically an image with all the elements as tuples. Now, before now, we only stored strings, integers, floating point values inside of a list. But now we can store more complex data types like this tuple. And we can access the first list, right? That's the first row. It's just that list right there in the first element of the image. It itself is a list of 2 tuples. And if we get the first element of that inside list, we get a tuple 25500. Well, Python actually isn't going to print the colors for us. We're going to just be loading images, manipulating them, and saving them, so that we won't actually be printing them out. But we're most interested as the tuple as a data type. So here's our color red. Image 00 gives us the color red. And then if we do 10, right, that's going to give us the second list, the first item in the second list. And 10 would give us 00255. And I skipped the second item in the first list. There's the green, or the green. And then we want the white. 11 gives us the white value. So we can access all the individual elements to get the tuples. Now, let's take a look at tuples themselves. And so here's a tuple. If we want to access the individual components of the tuple, we actually treat them like a list. We can or a string. R0, R1, R2 allows us to access the individual components of the tuple. So even though a tuple is stored using the parentheses, when accessing the individual elements in a tuple, we actually use the square brackets like a list or a string. Now, there's another important, can we do 3 indexing? I don't know what 3 indexing means. R3, there's only 3 elements, 0, 1, 2. R3 doesn't exist out of range. We only have 3 things, 0, 1, 2. So another thing about tuples, though, is that if we want to change any of these values separately, for example, if we wanted to change this red to black, like if I want to be able to set this 255 to 0, you probably could put 3 square brackets, yes. Yeah, I mean, you could do that if you're using the 2-dimensional image, right? That would give you first list, first element, first component. So yes, you probably could do 3 square brackets. So I want to change it, but here's the problem with that. If I want to change this from red to black, we try it with a tuple. We actually cannot change. This is one of the differences between a tuple and a list. We cannot change a tuple. A tuple object does not support item assignment. You cannot modify the individual components of a tuple. Once a tuple is created, you cannot change the elements of a tuple. So R is always going to be 22500 unless we change the entire thing. We can't change the individual components, but we can replace the tuple with a brand new tuple. So we cannot do assignment to tuple components. We have to replace the entire tuple completely. Just like a string, you can't modify the contents of a string. You have to replace the entire string completely. So what that looks like is initially we had red and we had 255, 0, 0, and we tried to change the individual component, but it didn't work. So we create a new tuple, and then we assign that. We have a new tuple being referenced. So it's a brand new tuple. It's not the same tuple. We cannot modify the components of a tuple. And to answer your question, image bracket 0, that would give you the red. Bracket 0 would give you the R part of the red. Yes, you can do it.